Hello, and welcome to the Legacy Stories. Today, we dive into the life of a man who refused to follow the rules. A man whose ideas didn't just build a company, but reshaped the world itself. This is the story of Steve Jobs, the visionary who turned rejection into revolution. It's a story about failure, obsession, genius, and belief. The kind of story that reminds us how even the hardest falls can lead to the brightest triumphs. Stay tuned till the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Legacy Stories, where we bring you powerful journeys of people who changed the course of history. Steve Jobs was born on February 24th, 1955, in San Francisco, California. But his journey didn't begin with comfort. He was adopted soon after birth, raised by Paul and Clara Jobs, a modest couple who couldn't offer luxury, but gave him something far more valuable: unconditional love and freedom to dream. From the very start, Steve was curious, not just about how things worked, but why they worked that way. As a child, he would take apart radios and televisions just to see what was inside. He wasn't interested in rules. He was interested in possibilities. He grew up in Silicon Valley, surrounded by engineers and dreamers. The young Jobs didn't know it then, but this small neighborhood would one day become the heart of global innovation, and he would be one of the reasons why. In 1976, a young Steve Jobs teamed up with his brilliant but quiet friend, Steve Wozniak. Together, they began working in a small garage, the famous one at 2066 Chris Drive. That garage wasn't fancy. It had no investors, no teams, no big offices. Just two young men, a few tools, and a dream that computers could be personal, that technology could belong to everyone, not just corporations. Wozniak built the machines, and Jobs sold the vision. Where others saw a box of circuits, Jobs saw the future of creativity, design, and human connection. They built the first Apple computer, the Apple I. It was rough and simple, but it worked. Soon came the Apple II, and suddenly, the world noticed. Apple wasn't just a company. It was a revolution, a rebellion against the idea that only experts could use technology. By the age of 25, Steve Jobs was a millionaire. But money wasn't his goal. Impact was. He wanted to change how people think, create, and dream. Jobs wasn't like other businessmen. He wasn't polite, he wasn't patient, and he definitely wasn't predictable. He demanded perfection, not just in machines, but in everything. From the curve of a device's corner to the font on the screen, everything had to be beautiful, simple, and meaningful. He built a team that believed in his vision, even when it seemed impossible. Under his leadership, Apple released the Macintosh, the first computer that truly felt human. It wasn't just a tool, it was art. The launch of the Macintosh in 1984 was legendary. A single commercial changed advertising forever. Think different became more than a slogan. It became a philosophy. Steve Jobs was no longer just a businessman. He was a creator, a disruptor, a symbol of what it meant to dream without limits. But behind the success, something was breaking. Success brings attention. Attention brings pressure, and pressure brings conflict. Inside Apple, Jobs' intensity began to divide the company. His drive for perfection became too much for some, and soon, those he trusted began to turn against him. In 1985, just 9 years after he founded Apple in his garage, Steve Jobs was fired from his own company. Imagine that. The man who built a dream, forced out of it. The press mocked him. Investors moved on. People said he was finished. But Steve didn't quit. He couldn't. He once said, "The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again." In failure, he found freedom. Jobs started again from scratch. He founded a new company called Next, focused on building high-end computers for education and business. The world wasn't ready for it, but the ideas he built there would later shape the future of Apple. At the same time, he bought a small graphic studio, a little-known company called Pixar. Most people didn't care about it, but Steve saw magic in those pixels. Years later, Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first full-length computer-animated film. It changed cinema forever and made Pixar a global powerhouse. Steve Jobs had failed, but his vision had not. Every loss, every heartbreak, every rejection, it all built something inside him that money couldn't buy. In 1997, Apple was struggling. The company that once led innovation was now close to bankruptcy. And so, Apple called back the man they had once pushed away. Steve Jobs returned, not as an angry founder, but as a wiser, more focused visionary. His return marked the beginning of a new era. He simplified Apple's products, cut down the chaos, and focused on what truly mattered: design, simplicity, and user experience. Then came the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. Each product wasn't just a device. It was a revolution in how humans interact with technology. The iPhone didn't just change phones. It changed communication, business, photography, and the way we live. Steve Jobs had done it again. He had turned pain into power, rejection into revolution. In 2004, Steve was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. He continued to work, to lead, to innovate, but his time was running out. Even as his health faded, his vision didn't. He stood on stage in 2007 and said, "Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything." He was right. And that product, the iPhone, would change the world forever. In October 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. But he left behind something eternal. Not just devices, but a belief that innovation comes from passion, not power. Steve Jobs once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." His story is proof of that. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't gentle, but he was real. He dreamed without fear. He worked without rest. And he believed in something bigger than himself. Every iPhone in a hand, every sleek design on a desk, every song played on an iPod. It's a whisper of his dream that never died. Steve Jobs changed not just how we use technology, but how we see it. He reminded us that creativity, courage, and belief can move mountains. Thank you for watching the Legacy Stories. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep the spirit of dreamers alive. Those who turn rejection into revolution and imagination into reality. Because as Steve Jobs showed us, one idea can change everything.